Welcome to another episode. What are you reading? What are you writing? I am your host, Karen E. Osborne, and this is a place where we bring creative people, amazing people who love to read. And most are writers, but some are musicians and artists, so that we can talk about books and the creative process. I'm the author of Getting It Right, Tangled Lies, Reckonings, and this year's book is True Grace, coming out in September. And my guest today is I've already decided that she's a fascinating woman, and you're going to be fascinated by her. Her name is Lisa Williamson Rosenberg. And listen to this. So she's the author of the critically acclaimed novel Embers on the Wind, which came out last year, right, Lisa? That came out
In
last
August,
year?
yes.
In August of last year. She is also an essayist. She's a psychotherapist specializing in depression, complex trauma, and racial identity, and a former ballet dancer. Now, how cool is all of that? Welcome, Lisa.
Karen, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm very glad to be here.
I am delighted. I can't wait to listen to all your great answers, but you really got me intrigued. How did you go from ballet to therapist?
So it's not as big. I know you said use the word leap. It's not as big a leap, no pun intended, as you would think. So when you are a ballet dancer, there's so much anxiety, so much pressure. There's so much self-doubt. You're working, your job is to be basically staring at yourself in the mirror for 10 hours a day and trying to capture a figment of someone's choreographic imagination. So there's that. There's what the human body can naturally do, and then there's what ballet expects of you. So there's a lot of anxiety and stress, and a lot of people turn to one another and lean and talk. You're always talking your friends through stuff and being talked through stuff. So I feel like it's a hat that dancers wear for one another so frequently. And also, and this kind of ties into being a novelist as well. When you're any kind of artist, whether you're a dancer or an actor, a painter, musician, you are thinking about the human experience all the time. And what does it mean to capture what it means to be human, whether it's a gesture in ballet or a sentence in a novel. Or as a therapist, how do we bridge the gap between me sitting here in this chair and you sitting there in that chair, and I'm trying to understand how you're experiencing life and also help you understand what you're going through and make it simpler. Does that
that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I, for a very brief moment, like that kind of a moment, I was working at the Dance Theater of Harlem. And I saw first of all, the amazing beauty and creativity, but also the anxiety and the body shaming, and there was just so
and that was DTH. And it's still, as DTH was code for Dance Theater of Harlem, I knew a number of dancers there, and there you're allowed to wear point shoes that are the same color as your skin, which now I think in other more mainstream companies you are, for women of color wear brown point shoes, but no, I was in pink lights.
Yes, yeah. It was, and the African American female body wasn't the norm of the profession. And so Dance Theater of Harlem really did do some amazing things. I was proud to be part of it, but I was only there for 7 months.
But it was
So, and I love the way you talked about what an artist does and what a therapist does. I really, also 20 years of therapy here, so all good, all good. So Embers of the Wind, tell us about the premise of this book and what inspired you to write it.
Okay, so the main character in Embers on the Wind is basically Whitaker House. which is a former stop, a former safe house on the Underground Railroad, turned 21st century Airbnb. And you see it in the 80s where it's a family home that young kids are invited to on a leadership trip to visit the family who's staying there, who are the ancestors of the abolitionist family of the Whitakers, who helped freedom-seeking formerly enslaved African Americans on their journey north to Canada. So that's the main house. And so you, in some of the stories, it's really linked, very tightly linked short stories that have to do with this house. And in one of them, you're actually experiencing the journey that the freedom seekers made. Two young women, well, one is a very young girl, 16-year-old Clementine, and little Annie, who's older, who they leave their enslavement in search of freedom, but also Annie's looking for 6 of her boys who were sold away. So you see the safe house back then, and you also see it in 2018, where a young couple from Brooklyn, they take their baby away for Memorial Day weekend vacation, and things don't go. There is a meeting of the mother. The mother has a meeting with, I shouldn't say meeting, a melding of minds with one of the spirits who died in the 19th century. And I don't want to give any plot points away, yes, but the Labor Day, the Memorial Day weekend vacation doesn't go the way one would hope. So it's basically this house that is haunted by the spirits of escaped freedom seekers who did not make it past the house.
Wow.
And their spirits, some of them died in a fire, some of them died elsewhere, and their spirits are yearning for connection with modern day ancestors, with modern day descendants. So it's kind of the meeting of modern Black women and the spirits of freedom-seeking Black women, and have we arrived? Have we fulfilled their dream for us? And there are a bunch of different characters, including the Whitakers, who are the abolitionists, the descendants of the abolitionists. There's Pam, who's a young girl from a Boston housing project in 1983, who goes on this trip there and finds herself in the root cellar where the freedom seekers hid. And then another generation is Kay, who has a deep connection to Whitaker House and to the past, because she is a seer, and she can kind of go back to all these different eras, and it takes to kind of the end of her story for her to figure out what the true connection is between her and Whitaker House. And
wow, that is amazing.
That's basically, but it's actually inspired by, so the character Clementine, the 16-year-old pregnant pregnant freedom seeker who is carrying the child of her enslaver, and when she escapes, she is based on an actual freedom-seeking young woman or old woman, I don't know, but my father-in-law owned this house. And it was our summer house. It was the house where everybody in the family would go, in the Berkshires, in Monterey, Massachusetts. And it was a former stop on the Underground Railroad. And the root cellar was where freedom-seeking African Americans hid en route to Canada. And the root cellar is still there. But so we would go, and I knew from my stepmother-in-law told me this legend that the house had been haunted by a freedom seeker. I don't use the word a runaway slave or escape slave.
Noticed, yes.
Because that's not their identity. They were enslaved. That's not who they are. But so one of these women was brought into the house for some reason. They weren't hiding in the house because it was too close to the road and it wasn't safe. They hid in the center of the property in the root cellar. She came into the house and apparently died, and her spirit apparently haunted the house still. Though I looked for her, I made myself available to be found by her. I never met her, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. And when I heard the legend at first, I thought, I bet it's an old woman. I bet it was an old woman who couldn't make it the rest of the way to Canada. She'd come from wherever it was, plantation in North Carolina, could not make it. And then I thought, well, maybe there's another reason why she came into the house. And maybe it was a young person who was pregnant. And that kind of led to, and
Back
what
to
would
the
that
story.
person think of me? And I always thought, because I'm biracial and Jewish, and my mother would come with us to the house. So even my own mother wasn't also Black. So and my father is deceased. So I would be the only Black adult. My husband's like my mother, my husband is white and Jewish, and his family is too. So I would be kind of the only representation that this runaway, spirit, that this formerly enslaved spirit might recognize. And I
Mm.
always thought that, because it isn't a big vacation spot for African American families, the Berkshires
Wow,
and
that is
so I used
amazing.
to think, what does this woman think of me? And that was kind of that inspired the relationship between Clementine and Galen, who is a young mother in 2019, who meets Clementine, and they kind of merge in spirit. And all the other stories kind of stemmed from that.
Hi, I have a quick question for you. Do you like murder mysteries? I have one that's a page turner. Tangled Lives. Two women, one older, one younger, get together to solve a mystery. I hope you'll give it a try.
Even though that's the story of the birthing room, where it goes back and forth between 1850 and 2018. And
Okay,
that's where, yeah.
yeah,
So
that
that's
is,
it. And that's how it was inspired and all that. Yeah.
yes. I think you have intrigued our audience. My goodness, you've certainly
That is my book.
intrigued me.
Yeah.
You've certainly
And you
got
can
me
order my book
interested.
from any
We'll
local
talk
bookstore.
about that in a
Yeah.
second.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll talk about it. Well,
Right.
before we hang up, I
Something to be
promise
done.
you, you'll be able to tell everybody how to find you and where to find you and where to order the book. I was wondering about, so given all of this premise that you have,
Mhm.
did your work as a therapist inform some of your writing? Was there,
Oh, sure. Because, well, first of all, the there's a lot of, trigger warning, there is a lot of trauma in the book. There is there is sexual abuse in the book. There is racial trauma, which I think so many of us live with to varying degrees, whether it's a small t trauma, of having to look perfect before you go to the grocery store in a very white suburb or something like that, which one of my characters deals with, or whether it's poverty, whether it's being other, the trauma of
mm,
being other. So that's part of it. And I work with a lot of African American women clients, and we can connect on a number of different levels. And I think, it's a very, in some ways, regardless of your socioeconomic status, it's a very there are certain universal truths to being a Black woman in America. Burdens that connect with the past, responsibilities that we have to our children, and kind of teaching them what it means
mm,
um, to be a Black woman. And for me, being raised by a white Jewish woman who came of age in this country during the 30s, where it was not safe to be a Jewish girl
wow,
in this country. So she and my father, who grew up at the same time, only Black, on the south side of Chicago, so they shared some of that trauma of being othered. And so I think that it does, my work as a therapist definitely informs my writing, also because I'm thinking about the nuance of your experience, and I'm trying to communicate that to a reader who may have shared something
yes,
similar, like, oh yeah, that's so true, that thing didn't happen to me, but I've felt that. And to be able to describe it, I think it's important,
yeah.
as a therapist and as an author.
So much of what you're describing and so much of what we all experience is kind of
Hmm.
generational trauma, right? It's that whole
Absolutely.
passing down. And
Hmm.
so I was curious, my novel that's coming out, my historical novel that's
Yes,
coming out, my
it was
protagonist
fascinating.
yeah, she's an immigrant woman. She's
Hmm.
mixed race. and her husband, interestingly, is also part Jewish,
Mhm.
and she is dealing with generational trauma. And so I was just curious, do any of your uh, does the healing happen? You know, does the healing happen in the book? Does anyone get healed? Does anyone get better? Or how do we, you know, or does the generational trauma go on to the next generation that we don't even know about?
So the healing kind of happens off stage,
Mm-hmm.
but it does in that. So Kay is kind of a mother who has, very, she's a lot of privilege. She owns a brownstone. And yet she has a moment where she falls in the street and smudges her designer coat. And her realtor, who's a white woman who passes her on the street, and her realtor who sold her $2 million brownstone, steps over her
Ah,
basically, and thinks she's a whole, just one smudge on her coat, she's a Black street woman in that split
wow.
second. And her identity shifts so quickly. And yet, in another scene, she's in a coffee shop with her two kids, trying to make friends with somebody who you later find out is Galen, the one who goes to the Berkshires with her baby and connects with Clementine, the escaped, freedom
Mhm.
seeker. But she has two children, and they're kind of like playing on their iPad, half eating croissants, and like not really interested in what she's doing. And it's this moment of to the privilege of your children being able to take you for granted,
Mm,
after, and that's kind of juxtaposed with little Annie, who had six beautiful boys, and they were all sold one after the other. And meanwhile,
mhm.
like Miles and Billy are like, on, mama, that 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 is the healing that she knows she can relax her children. Are it's complicated. So there's this word throughout the book that comes up that's almost,
Mm.
I can afford a $2 million brownstone. And yet when my son was born, he was so light skinned, and I nursed him, I was afraid somebody might take him away from me because he was so light. There's that almost. So here, and yes, there's healing. And one character who has been sexually abused as a child is sent by her therapist as a final stage back to the town, back to the Berkshire Mountains, and that's how she connects to the site of her abuse. But before that, she is brought to a place to dance with other women. Her therapist accompanies her to kind of this huge underground space where all these women and girls dressed in like t-shirts and sweatpants and beads just dance together and bump into each other and experience that contact in a super safe way. And that's one stage. So like there are different steps of healing
Different
to
steps
be
of
able to
healing.
talk about it too. And yeah, so I've got,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah, so
Oh my
there
goodness.
are different kinds of healing, but not quite. Like it's an almost healing.
So you are so busy. You have
Yeah.
got a very busy life. You have
Mhm.
family life. You have your therapy life. You have your
Yeah.
writing life. Are
Mhm.
you working on anything? Have you been able to work on something new
So
during all this
that's sort
busy
of
time?
part of the therapy for myself is writing, and writing through the human experience that comes with it comes from my own interactions. So I kind of need to always write. So yes,
Mm.
and in terms of books, I am like on the verge of sending a draft of a completed novel to my agent
Mm.
right now. I got it back from my beta readers, so I'm at that stage where he doesn't know it, but he's going to be getting it from me soon, and then I'll hear how close to done it really is.
That's wonderful.
So yes, yeah,
Congratulations. I
thanks.
hear you. We are always writing, aren't we? We are always, always
We
writing.
are, even when we're
It's
not, we are, even when we're
we
just sitting
are
there
in our
feeling guilty
heads.
about it, right?
It's yes, always writing. So you're also a reader. I never met a
Yeah,
writer who isn't a
he was
reader
not a
ever.
reader. Yeah.
And I wonder if you have some book recommendations for our audience.
So yes, so I love the word on the page. I'm a big literary fiction reader. I love when sentences do something that make me go, oh, I know that feeling, and you just put it in this incredible way. So I'm doing a lot of that. The book I'm working on now is a little bit more suspense thriller-ish, so I'm starting to read more of that. But I have to say the book I'm recommending right now to anyone who can listen to an audiobook is Finding Me, and that's Viola Davis's memoir, and she won a Grammy for it. And it's her voice. And it's so phenomenal, her experience and her trauma and healing. Just so good. I also recently read so Fellowship Point by Alice Elliott Dark. And I think that it captures the nuance of friendship. It's a friendship between two older women, very upper class white women from Philadelphia, and then there's a property in Maine that they share, and they're kind of dealing with the unraveling of their own health and their families and the control they had, but it's also this incredibly gripping plot, and Alice Elliott Dark is just such a brilliant writer. There's so many books that I love.
That's excellent. Thank you. Those are two great great recommendations. I've been thinking about getting Viola Davis's book, and now you've convinced me that I need to listen to her read it, because she's an amazing actor. She is. I learn about writing from watching her act.
Absolutely. And
I do.
She does her mother and her father and her
this sounds awesome. This sounds awesome. So I want you to be able to tell our audience how they can find you, how they can find your book, how they can be in touch with you. So tell us how they can find you.
So LisaWRosenberg.com is my website. There's a contact sheet on that, which you can use. I have to update it and add things like this because I'm really slow with updating my website for a lot of reasons. Instagram, it's Lisa. No, that's not true. It's LWRose.author.
LWRose.author on Instagram.
That's my Instagram. And then Twitter, I'm still on Twitter because there is so much stuff going on. Can't stand the dude who took it over, but it's such a great place for authors to connect. It is. I've just met so many people on there. I learned everything I know about publishing on there. So it's Lisa W. Rosenberg. That's it. At Lisa W. Rosenberg.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you so much. This has been such an interesting conversation, and I so appreciate you sharing as much as you did. Thank you so much, and I hope all of you have enjoyed it. I hope you will follow Lisa, that you will go to her Instagram, you'll go to her Twitter page, you'll go to her website that she's going to update. She just told us that. And I hope that you are already following me on Instagram and on Twitter and on YouTube and on Facebook, or any of those that you prefer. And until next time, next week, I hope you will join us again for What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you so much, Karen.